Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. It's a great crowd. We're almost entirely full. Um, my name is Claire Lindsay, and I'm on the board of the Rappahannock League for Environmental Protection. Now, a little bit about the wonderful Dr. Doug Tallamy. Doug is the T.A. Baker Professor of Agriculture in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. Doug has authored over 100 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 43 years. Chief among Doug's research goals are to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. As I'm sure you all know, Doug is the author of some of the most popular books on nature, including the ones that you saw on the table on the way in. Nature's Best Hope, which was a New York Times bestseller, and The Nature of Oaks, which was a winner of the American Horticultural Society's 2022 Book Award. Doug lectures widely in the United States. And guess what? He's already been to our tiny county in this very theater. Our friends and neighbors, Bruce and Doug and Susan Jones, invited Doug here 7 years ago. That was 2017, and that's when I first learned about Doug's work. And I want to thank you, Bruce and Susan, for doing that. Since then, Doug has expanded his horizons. In 2021, Doug and his co-founder, Michelle Alfondary, established Homegrown National Park. So you may have heard of the so-called insect apocalypse and the staggering loss of 3 billion birds in North America. These are signs that our ecosystems are in trouble and that we need to do something. And that's where Homegrown National Park comes in. Homegrown National Park is a grassroots call to action with a mission to catalyze millions of people across the country to plant native and remove invasives. And this applies in cities, suburbs, and the countryside. And it's all in the name of restoring vital ecosystem services that we need to survive. Each and every one of us can be a part of the solution by implementing some simple changes on our own property. And yes, with larger property, it will be a little more complicated, but with correspondingly much bigger impacts. We hope that hearing from Doug will inspire you to embrace the Homegrown National Park mission, and as Doug says, start digging. Before I turn the mic over to Doug, I would like to send out a special thank you to RAC for allowing us to use the theater tonight. RAC cheerfully rearranged a very tight schedule of showings here at the theater to make this evening possible. I also want to thank my friends who have helped to make this happen, and a special shout out to Mike Wenger, Milda Vivada, and John Cherky for all your great ideas and assistance. We'll have a short time for questions after Doug's presentation. Now, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Doug Tallamy.
I'm going to trip over you. So. Thank you, Claire. I told her to keep it short, but she, like me. I'm trying to figure out why everybody's here. It's either very slow here on Friday nights, or you actually came to hear me, or this is the best place for air conditioning. I think that might be it. All right, let's talk about Homegrown National Park, what it is, how we came up with that idea, what we hope to accomplish. Before we do that, though, let's talk about what this is. By the way, I'm standing down here because I have to see the screen. If I'm up there, I'll fall off the stage, and it's harder to see the screen. That looks like a fecal sac. Birds that have a nest, they don't want their babies to poop in the nest, so they have evolved this little sack, and they put their poops in the sack, and the parents pick it up and fly out and just drop it, and it splats on a leaf, and it looks a lot like that. That's not a fecal sac, that is a bola spider. There are the legs up there. It's trying to look like a fecal sac because nobody wants to eat a fecal sac. But at night, it looks like a real spider. It hangs down from a leaf, and it drops a single strand of silk and one sticky glob of glue at the end there, and then it goes hunting. Now, you wouldn't think it would catch anything, that way. Building a web seems like a better approach, but it does. It catches moths, they fly in, get stuck. The spider spins them around really quickly, wraps them up in silk, and then has a good meal. And then he goes hunting again and has another good meal, and then another good meal. And after each good meal, it cuts them loose and it goes hunting again. And after it's eaten enough, it has enough energy to make a egg mass. That's the little egg sac. It's a ornamental silk pouch, and that's how they spend the winter, hanging from branches. You can actually find them all winter long. So the real question is, why are moths flying into that little target? And the answer is, it's not an accident. She's actually releasing the sex pheromone of particular species of moths. So all the moths that fly in are males because they think she's a female. She is, but the wrong species. And I wanted to know what the moth species was that the bola spiders in my yard were attracting. So I unwound the little bodies that she cut loose, and it turned out to be the bronze cutworm. And I have bronze cutworm adults in my yard because I've got bronze cutworm larvae. And I've got bronze cutworm larvae because I've got goldenrod, which is their primary host plant. I also have this beautiful moth, the dot-line white, because I've got oak trees, primarily white oaks. That's their favorite, and because I don't rake the leaves away from under those trees. There is a dot-line white cocoon in that leaf litter. Can you see it? It is right there. There it is, a little bit bigger. There's no way you would see that when you're raking. And of course, when you do rake up your leaves and throw them away, you're throwing away a lot of life forms. I've got evening primrose moths because I've got evening primrose. And I've got evening primrose because I planted it so that moth would come. This is very intentional. It did come. It spends the day with its head stuffed in the flowers. Sometimes it's crowded, but it's always cute. I've got zebra swallowtails because I've got pawpaws, and again, we planted them specifically to attract the zebra swallowtail. It would take me a long time to describe all the things that are making a living on our property right now. It would not take me very long to describe what's on a typical residential landscape. There is no goldenrod, so there's no bronze cutworms, so there's no bola spiders. There's no white oaks, so there's no dot-line whites. There's no evening primrose, so there's no evening primrose moth. There's no pawpaw, so there's no zebra swallowtails. As a matter of fact, there's very little that can live on a typical residential landscape, and we've got 135 million acres of typical residential landscapes. And we're not finished. We're still developing 800,000 acres a year, pretty much the way we always have. And it's one of the reasons we're seeing some pretty scary headlines these days, like that insect apocalypse is here, talking about global insect decline. North America's lost 3 billion breeding birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of our North American bird population already gone. 2/3 of Earth's wildlife is already gone. 40% of Earth's plants are facing extinction. The UN is predicting we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction in the next 20 years. And they made that prediction 2 years ago. So now I guess it's the next 18 years. It's a prediction. It's one we have to make sure doesn't happen because those are the species that actually keep us alive on this planet. But those are the reasons that Elizabeth Colbert gets to write The Sixth Extinction, talking about the sixth great extinction event that this planet has ever experienced. But this is the first one to be caused by a living being, and that's us. Now, people are upset, and that's good. I actually didn't think they would care, but they do care. I get emails all the time about how terrible this is. There are actually scientists studying our reactions to the loss of biodiversity. One of those scientists is Richard Hobbs, and he wrote a paper likening our response to biodiversity loss to the 5 stages of grief that we experience when we hear we have a terminal disease. First, there's denial. There's certainly a lot of that going on. Anger. I feel that sometimes. Bargaining, well, what can we do? Maybe make it a little bit better. Depression, we all feel that sometimes. And then stage 5 is acceptance. And this is where we have to push back because acceptance is equivalent to giving up. And giving up is not an option. We cannot, nature's not optional. Can't give up on it. So we need a 6th action stage or 6th stage, and we'll call that action. There are things we can do to make sure that this biodiversity loss stops where it is and actually improves. Now we have parks. We've got parks, we've got preserves, we've got national parks. Our national parks were established primarily to preserve their exquisite beauty. They are wonderful, beautiful places. And actually, Teddy Roosevelt had a lot to do with that. And this is what he said about it. He said, the establishment of the National Park Service is justified by considerations of good administration. So Teddy was patting himself on the back, as he should, of the value of natural beauty as a national asset, and of the effectiveness of outdoor life and recreation in the production of good citizenship. In other words, our parks were created because they were pretty places for us to play in. They were not created with the idea of conserving the life around us. And that's one of the reasons we only have 3.6% of the U.S. in the national park system. Only 12% is federally protected. And if you compare that to a country like Costa Rica, which is doing well, I think the figure is 27% is federally protected. So maybe we can improve on that. But we do have those parks. We do have preserves. We've got a lot of smaller parks and preserves. Why aren't they good enough to preserve that biodiversity that we all depend on? It's a good question, and there's actually several answers. But the biggest one, the most important one, is that they are too small. When you take a large area like this and you shrink it down to a little habitat fragment, and that's an exaggeration, but not too much. You know, the average woodlot size in Delaware is 10 acres. So, not too much of an exaggeration. When you take a large area and you shrink it into a small area, you're taking large populations and shrinking them down to small or tiny populations. And that is the problem. Small populations are highly vulnerable to local extinction. Why? Because all populations fluctuate. In good times they go up, in bad times they go down. If you're a large population, this top line here, even in your down cycles, there's enough individuals so you can increase quickly when times get better. But if you're a tiny population, often in your down cycle you hit zero. You blink out of your little habitat patch and then you're gone. And unless you recolonize it later on, you are permanently gone. That's called local extinction. And recolonization is getting harder and harder. Picture a box turtle crossing Route 95. Doesn't happen. And there's studies all over the world telling us pretty much the same thing. Some of these studies are quite lengthy, over 100 years in length. And they're saying that the natural areas that we have left on the planet are not large enough to sustain the amount of nature that we humans need. And that's not good news. Now, we tend to use extinction as a measure of trouble. I don't like that because that's like going to the doctors when you're dead. It's too late. It's too late. But there's another measure we can use, and that is we call it defaunation, the reduction in the abundance of species that used to run our ecosystems, the ones that were the most important, the ones that were the most numerous. And a great example would be the American chestnut. It was the dominant tree from Maine all the way down to Georgia before we brought the chestnut blight in and essentially eliminated it. Now, it is not extinct. There are still plants that come up from rootstocks, a few trees here and there, but it's functionally extinct. It's no longer performing the role that it once performed in our ecosystems. Rusty patch bumblebee. Maybe 10 years ago, it was one of the most common bees in North America. Now, if you find one, it's a big deal because it's on the edge of extinction. I've never seen one. So again, functionally extinct, even though there are a few individuals here and there. How about the American beaver? When Europeans came to North America, the hydrology of the entire continent had been determined by beavers. But we essentially trapped them all out. Now again, they're not extinct and they're making a comeback in some places. And in most places, every time they act like a beaver, we trap them and take them someplace else because we don't like that. So the hydrology is still changed from what it used to be. So defaunation, the reduction in the abundance of species that run ecosystems, that's the real problem. It's the abundant species that run our ecosystems, and when you lose them, we have a big problem. It's local, it's everywhere, and more, we tend not to notice. We tend not to notice because of a phenomenon called shifting baseline. We tend to think that the way things were when we were kids is the way they've always been, the way they should be, it's normal. Which means, so for example, none of us missed the passenger pigeon because it was extinct before any of us were born. It was the most abundant bird on the planet. So we are losing the species that support us without even noticing it because of shifting baseline. Edwin Wade Teal decades ago said, we cannot make the world uninhabitable for other forms of life and have it habitable for ourselves. This is just common sense. So what are we going to do? Well, there's good news. There's good news. One of them is that this is now part of it's on the global stage. It's part of the global discussion. The UN had a big meeting in Montreal, I guess it was 2 years ago, to discuss the biodiversity issue. Two crises on this planet. We've got climate change, but we also have a biodiversity crisis. And the UN met to solve it. This was a headline that came out of that meeting. Crucial negotiations to protect biodiversity are moving at a snail's pace. We're negotiating about whether or not we're going to save what keeps us alive on this planet. I hope we come up with the right answer, but you know what's going to happen? The UN will pass a resolution or several resolutions, and we will ignore them. There's no teeth in it at all. So it's good that they're talking about it. It's good that's in our headlines, but I'm not going to count on the UN to solve it. We could listen to what E.O. Wilson told us, because he told us a great deal. The late E.O. Wilson, he died the day after Christmas 2 years ago. And he, very, very long and productive career at Harvard. One of the things that was consistent throughout that career was his love of life on planet Earth and his efforts to save it. And he wanted to save it not just because he loved it, but because he knew it was essential to our own survival. So in 2016, he wrote this book, Half Earth, Our Planet's Fight for Life. And he had one simple message. He said, if we're going to save life anywhere on planet Earth, we're going to have to save nature. We're going to have to save functioning ecosystems on at least half of the planet, or it will disappear everywhere, and that includes humans. Very bold statement, and he spent most of the book talking about the science that supports that very bold statement. And then he ended the book. He didn't spend very much time telling us how we were going to save nature on half of planet Earth. Of course, to a conservation biologist, that's a great idea. We'll just put half the Earth aside, and all those things that are in trouble can be in that half. We'll be in the other half, and it'll be great. But half of terrestrial Earth is already in some form of agriculture, and I don't see that diminishing anytime soon. We've got 8 billion people, and all of our hardscape, our roadways, our airports, our detritus in the other half, and we don't have a third half to put aside for nature. So how can we realize E.O. Wilson's dream? Well, I think we can, but we need a new approach to conservation to accomplish that. We have got to give up the idea that humans and nature cannot coexist. We've had this idea pretty much forever. Humans are here, nature's someplace else. Even if we like it, it is someplace else, and we're not going to mix. Well, my main message tonight is that that's not going to work in the future. Not only is living with nature an option, it's now the only viable option that's left to us. In the past, of course, conservationists worked pretty much exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We now need to turn that on its head and practice conservation where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much everywhere. We're not just going to practice conservation here. We're going to practice it over here. But look, there's nothing to conserve over there. It is gone, which means we have to move beyond conservation into restoration. We have to put it back. And that means we've got to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Not hang on by a thread, but thrive. So this is one of the main problems or the main challenges that is facing us. We have fragmented natural habitats into tiny little remnants that are out there that are too small and too isolated from each other to sustain the biodiversity that we need. So what we have proposed, or what some people have proposed, is building biological corridors that connect those isolated fragments so that they are no longer isolated anymore. And plants and animals can move back and forth between viable habitats. And that will help one of the big problems, and that's inbreeding depression, where these populations are so small that close relatives are breeding with each other, and we know that doesn't work very long. But the main problem remains. They're still tiny populations. So when they fluctuate, they will still disappear over time. So I think we have to go beyond biological corridors. We have to create viable habitat in between those viable habitats. In other words, we've got to put the plants back in these spaces. That's better. That's even better. Now, what'll be in these lighter areas here, that's where our major cities and some of our major farming is. But where we live, where we work, where we play, where we worship, where we shop, all of those places have to be renovated. We've got to return them to ecosystem function. We need functioning ecosystems everywhere, not just in parks and preserves. But what is this space in there? It's private property for the most part, which means to achieve this, we need a new attitude about property rights. We love our property rights. We've got this idea that we can do whatever we want on this little piece of the earth that we own. This is our castle. We're the kings, and we are definitely in control. The problem is, our properties are not like Las Vegas. You know that what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. Some of you really know that. But it's not true with our properties. Whatever happens on our property does not stay on our property. And that is the issue. Whatever we do on our property, either for the good or for the bad, impacts all the land and people and animals around us. Because our properties, every single one of them, are parts of local ecosystems. So let's talk about what the impacts of deciding that we're going to have a big lawn like this are. It's going to determine whether rain that falls is going to infiltrate very slowly or leave as stormwater runoff. It's going to determine whether, when that rain leaves, whether it's carrying a bunch of pollutants with it. A lot of nitrogen and phosphorus and herbicides and insecticides, all the stuff we put on our lawns, right into the local watershed. It's going to determine how much carbon we are adding to the atmosphere every weekend when we mow that lawn. It's also going to determine whether or not we're supporting pollinators in that space. A lawn, if you have a lawn the way you're supposed to have a lawn, it's not going to support any pollinators. You have eliminated the resources that our pollinators need. You also have you've bypassed the opportunity to plant a plant that is actually going to sequester carbon, pull carbon out of the atmosphere, tie it up in its tissues, and then pump that extra carbon into the ground. All plants are sequestering carbon, but lawn is the very worst carbon sequesterer out of any of the choices that we have. And of course, once the carbon is in the soil, it's extremely stable. It can stay there thousands of years if we don't turn that soil over again. A third of the carbon, by the way, that is up in the atmosphere right now has come from us chopping down the forests and removing the plants on the planet. If we put them back, we could pull up to a third back out. Not going to solve the problem, but it sure is going to help. And the plant choices we make when we are landscaping our yards are going to determine whether we're harboring ecological tumors, the invasive species like Callery pear, Bradford pear. They're in our yards. They're not supporting much biodiversity, but they don't stay in our yards. You know, people get confused. They say, what do you mean that tree I planted? It's still there. It hasn't moved. Well, its babies have moved. Its offspring. The birds eat the berries. They fly out. They poop them out. And then, of course, it's a major invasive species in our natural areas. They become ecological tumors that castrate ecological function in our natural areas. And then finally, our plant choices are going to determine how well we're supporting a local food web. Are we choosing the plants that actually pass on part of their energy so that you can have other creatures in your yard or not? So how we landscape, how much lawn we have, our plant choices are going to determine how much life our local properties can sustain. It's going to determine their carrying capacity. And that is an awesome responsibility. And that is an awesome responsibility that most homeowners do not know they have. But it's also an opportunity to create a grassroots movement. There are millions of people out there. There are millions of people who own property, big or small. And even if they don't own property, they all vote, or they can have container gardens on their porches and their balconies. Everybody can make a difference in the future towards conservation. So what we're talking about here is building an army of future conservationists, divvying up this huge global problem into tiny little bits that each one of us can participate in, and then we will make a huge difference. Where's this going to happen? For the most part, it's going to happen on private property. Most of the lower 48 states is privately owned. 78% is privately owned. 85.6% east of the Mississippi is privately owned. So again, if we don't practice conservation on private property, we're going to fail, and failure is not an option. So collectively, it's property owners who are now the hope and future of conservation. Let's return to lawn again. It is the low-hanging fruit. We've got more than 44 million acres of lawn nationwide, which is an area bigger than all of New England. You might wonder why we do that. Well, it's a status symbol. It's a very important status symbol. It's neat. It's relatively easy to care for. And allows us to display our Halloween decorations. But what if we cut that area of lawn in half? We're not going to get rid of lawn. It's a wonderful cue for care. That is the best plant to walk on if we actually walk around our property, so you want lawn there. But let's make the math simple. Let's say we got 40 million acres of lawn. We're going to cut that in half. That'll give us 20 million acres that we can restore right at home. And that is the basis. That's the core of what we call Homegrown National Park. And it's a big area. It's bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, plus the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. You add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. So Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. What are we talking about? We're talking about this small nonprofit that we've created. You can go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and you can register your property on the map. You just register, that's the biodiversity map. You register where you are, your location, and the amount of your property you're going to become a good steward of. Maybe you really are going to reduce the lawn. Maybe you're going to plant an oak tree. Maybe you're going to put an aster in a flower pot. Doesn't matter how small or modest your effort is. It's kind of like a pledge. This is what I'm going to do in the future because now I know I'm important in conservation. And once you do that, your little piece of your county is going to light up with a firefly. And you get to see how many other people in your county have joined Homegrown National Park. And of course, the goal is to get that message that we're all critically important to the future of conservation. We want that goal to go viral. We want the whole country to light up. Our mission is very simple. We want to motivate millions of people to regenerate biodiversity in the two ways that will regenerate biodiversity: planting the native plants that creates it and removing the invasive species that helps destroy biodiversity. And when we do that, we're going to build a community culture that is sympathetic to the needs of conservation. This is a little overblown here, but that is a record of where our national parks are right now. We want to turn that into that. It shouldn't be that hard. All right, there are real ecological products associated with Homegrown National Park, a significant increase in biodiversity. And I'll give you a few examples of how well this works when we do it. It works because nature is tremendously resilient. A measurable reduction in invasive species. If everybody removed the invasive plants that are just on their property, we'd be 78% done. We'd be 85% done in the east. It'd be a tremendous first step. Significant drawdown in atmospheric CO2. Again, turf grass is the worst plant for sequestering carbon. If we replace it with just about anything else, we're going to sequester a lot of carbon. We're going to help climate change. And we're also going to start to create viable habitat outside of parks and preserves. Any bit of conservation we do outside of a park is going to help conservation inside of the park. They're really important sociological products as well. Much of what we're talking about here is a sociological problem. It's not a scientific problem. National awareness. Not just of what the problem is, but what the solutions are and what our roles in those solutions are. We want to change the culture. We want people to recognize that nature's not just there for our entertainment. It's not optional. It's essential. It's essential for everybody. And because it's essential for everybody, everybody owns responsibility to help sustain it. We want to convert hope into action. Hope is good, but action's even better. We want to merge national conservation efforts that already exist, Audubon and National Wildlife Federation and Wild Ones and Sierra Club and all the land conservancies into one visual that we call the biodiversity map. What we're trying to do is record successful conservation that is already happening on private property so that we can see what it looks like. Where is it? Where are there gaps that we have to work harder on? It's a measure of how close or how well we're doing towards this. It's actually a global goal of preserving 30% of the earth by 2030, 30% of the US by 2030. That is not going to happen if we don't record conservation on private properties. So if we're going to take areas that look like this and turn them into that, we're going to have to take that and turn it into that. You don't have to get rid of your house. You don't have to move. You just have to put some plants back. It's easier than you think. Did I mention that it's free? We don't charge anything. We are not trying to pull members away from existing conservation organizations. We just want to record the good work that they are doing. Free is good for the members. There's a downside to it, though. It means we exist solely because of your generosity. So thank you for that. There is urgency in enacting the Homegrown National Park solution. Remember that 135 million acres of residential landscapes that are out there? That's a big job. So we all need to get to work. We have to understand what it is we're supposed to do. What do we need to do to know that we have succeeded? Well, there's 4 things that every property out there needs to accomplish, 4 ecological goals. Every property has to support a food web. If you don't support a food web, you're not transferring energy from plants to animals. If you don't have any animals, you don't have a functioning ecosystem. Every property has to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and tie it up in the plants and the soil of that property. Every property has to manage the watershed in which it lies. This is a house down the street from me. This guy, and I do know him, he's destroying my watershed. He's so proud of his perfect lawn, but he's destroying my watershed. Does he have the right to do that? That's another whole argument, but he doesn't know he's doing that. So he has to manage the watershed better. And every property has to support pollinators. Again, lawn doesn't do any of those things. It is the very worst plant choice for those 4 property goals, and that's why we focus on that first of all. We also have to focus on plant choice. If we're going to reduce the lawn, what plants should we put in the area that are plants? That, of course, is burning bush. And it's one of the favorite ornamentals that has escaped and become a major invasive species. It turns out there's 3 kinds of plants out there. There are plants that contribute energy to local food webs, plants that do not contribute energy to local food webs, and plants that actively remove energy from local food webs. The very best contributor around the country is one of our oaks. Genus Quercus, we've got 91 species of oaks, and they are contributing, in 84% of the counties in which they occur, they're contributing more energy to local food webs than any other plant genus by far. Good example of a non-contributor would be a ginkgo biloba from Asia. It's a nice ornamental plant. It's got good fall color. We use it a lot in our cities, but nothing eats a ginkgo, so it's not adding any energy to local food webs. And a good example of a non-contributor or a detractor would be any of the invasive ornamentals that we've planted. Things like, this is bamboo, or, well, you know, there's a whole bunch of them, that escape. Not only are they not contributing energy to local food webs, but they are pushing out the native plants that do contribute energy, which means the net result is a loss of energy. We need to gain a new appreciation of caterpillars. Now, you all know I talk about caterpillars a lot because I have gained that appreciation, and I want to pass it on to you. Why are we talking about caterpillars? Because they, out of all the things that are eating plants, they are transferring more energy from plants to other organisms than any other type of plant eater. So if we design landscapes that do not have enough caterpillars in them, we're going to have failed food webs and eventually failed ecosystems. They are the meat and potatoes of local food webs. And that's why I talk about keystone plants, because keystone plants are the plants that support the most caterpillars. Remember what a keystone is. It's a stone in the middle of the Roman arch. If you take that stone out of the arch falls down. Well, if you take keystone plants out of your local food web, the food web collapses because they are making most of the caterpillars. Just 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food that drives our food webs. So if you don't want to say caterpillars, say bird food. It's the same thing. And that's why I talk about keystone plants as being the 2x4s in the ecological house that you're building. They are the support system. Your house will not stand up without those 2x4s. We have been trying to build houses out of wallpaper for the last 100 years. It doesn't work. How do you find out what the best keystone plants are? Where you live, you go to Native Plant Finder and the National Wildlife Federation website, put in your zip code and the ranked list of the most important woody plant genera and herbaceous plant genera in your county will pop up. And this is true for any county in the country. We have to do it by county because as you move around the country, this plant list changed a little bit. Now this is very abbreviated. I stopped because I ran out of room. They're much bigger plant lists than that. But the old excuse of not knowing what to plant is just an excuse now. You go to Native Plant Finder and you do know what to plant. We also have to think about the relationship between those caterpillars that we're talking about and the plants that they eat. It turns out that 90% of the insects that eat plants are what we call host plant specialists. They can only eat particular plants. They can only eat the plants for which they have specialized adaptations that help them get around plant defenses. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction, so they protect their tissues with nasty compounds, and only the insects that are good at getting around those compounds can eat those plants. Let's use the monarch butterfly as an example, because we love the monarch and because you already know much about the monarch. You already know it is a specialist on milkweed, and you probably know that milkweed are toxic plants. If you're into eating plants outside, don't eat a milkweed. It's got cardiac glycosides in it. If you eat enough of the milkweed, it will stop your heart. It also is filled with sticky latex sap. When you break open a milkweed leaf like that, you get this white goo. And if you put it on your finger and watch it for a few minutes, on exposure to air, to oxygen, it gels. It becomes like a chewing gum. And that's the defensive property. If that gets smeared on the mouth parts of a caterpillar, it glues their mouth shut. And then they starve to death. But monarch caterpillars eat milkweeds. How do they do that? Well, they've got the physiological defenses to get them around the cardiac glycosides. They've got enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify that. But how do they get around that sticky latex sap? Well, you can watch this in your own yard. They have a couple of milkweed plants there. The monarch will walk onto a new leaf. First thing it does is go to the end of the leaf and it starts to eat. And if any latex sap comes out at all, it will stop eating immediately, turn around, go back up the leaf maybe 2/3 of the way, and then it starts to chew through the midrib. And it chews till it has entirely severed the midrib. And what it's done is blocked the canals that shunt the latex sap from that end of the leaf to that end of the leaf. So once it does that, it can turn around and go back down and eat the leaf without any latex sap coming out at all. It's a very simple behavioral adaptation, but most other insects haven't figured that out. It can do that because it has specialized on milkweed literally for millions of years. And because they chew through the midrib, it actually flags the leaf. So you can, if you're a monarch hunter, you can drive down the road and look at a patch of milkweeds. If you see flagged leaves, you know that there are monarchs there. So that's the upside of specialization. Monarchs now have the ability to get around all the defenses of milkweeds, and most other insects have not been able to do that. The downside of specialization is that now that's all they can eat. In developing all the adaptations to get around milkweeds, they have not spent any time, any evolutionary time, developing adaptations to get around crepe myrtle or any of the other plants that are out there. Out of the 2,137 plant genera found in North America, monarchs can only eat one, Asclepias. That's called host plant specialization, and there's nothing special about monarch. Remember, 90% of the insects that are out there are specialized, have specialized relationships with their host plants, just like monarchs do. We can actually measure what happens when you take away the native plants that support these specialized relationships and replace them with plants that our insects have never seen before in evolutionary time. We've done this a number of times in my lab. I'll just share one study with you. It was a very simple one I did with an undergrad. We went into hedgerows in Maryland, Delaware, and Pennsylvania, hedgerows that were invaded by non-native plants. Here's a lot of autumn olive, a lot of multiflora rose, and many other things, and compared caterpillar communities in those hedgerows with caterpillar communities in hedgerows that are not invasive, almost all native plants. Finding these was the real trick. But when we compared the number of species in those invaded hedgerows, we found there's a 68% reduction in species richness, a 91% reduction in the abundance of those caterpillars, and a 96% reduction in the biomass of those caterpillars, the actual energy that is being passed along that food web. We don't have to call it biomass. Again, let's call it bird food. 96% reduction in bird food in these invaded hedgerows. No wonder our birds are disappearing. So in the things that we have to think about, I want to spend a lot of time thinking about all those things that E.O. Wilson told us. He spent, 60, 65 years at Harvard telling us wonderful things. And one of the things he said is that the insects are the little things that run the world. He did that way back in 1987. And he had a very simple message. He said, life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would so drastically change energy flow through our terrestrial ecosystems that the food webs that support our vertebrate animals would collapse. We would lose our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals. The biosphere, living portion of the earth, would rot because it would have lost insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients. And all we'd have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humans wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. We depend on insects. So why do we have National Insect Killing Week? Now, this was 1929, but our attitude hasn't changed a whole lot. This was a campaign to boost the sales of all brands of chemicals to rid the community of insects. Not pests, insects, all of them. Get rid of them. We also have to improve our national approach to saving our pollinators. Now, we do have very good recognition of this. We noticed decades ago that our honeybees were in trouble. And we said, well, gee, if the honeybees are in trouble, maybe our native bees are in trouble. Yes, they're in trouble too. And we need to do this everywhere, not just in agriculture. The media all the time is telling you need to save pollinators because they pollinate a third of our crops. May Berenbaum at the University of Illinois. We lost E.O. Wilson. He was the top of the line entomologist in the world. Well, May Berenbaum's number 2. So she looked at it. She says, I don't know where this third of the crops came from. It's really about a 1/12 of our crops are pollinated by animals. What we really need to do is save the pollinators because they're pollinating 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. Some of them are our crops, but we need all of these plants everywhere. Losing our pollinators is not an option. We have to also develop a better appreciation for the ecological value of fallen leaves. We call them leaf litter. Gene Ponzi in St. Louis says we should call them leaf largesse because of all the things they deliver. And it's a number of things. They form a blanket over the soil, protect the soil moisture. All of the very complex soil community depends on high humidity, on moisture, and it's the leaf litter that protects that moisture. If your soil dries out, all those things die, including your mycorrhizal fungal associations that transfer nutrients from the soil to your plants. The leaves are also returning nutrients to the soil. The nutrients that your trees used the previous year are tied up in those leaves. The leaves fall to the ground. You have to get those nutrients back in the ground so that you have a closed nutrient cycle. Your tree will use it again in the future. When we rake away our leaves, we're exposing it to the drying aspects of no leaf litter, and we also throw away the nutrients that they need. Then we go to the store and we buy mulch. What does that say? Oh, I know why we do this, because we're afraid the leaves are going to suppress our plant growth. I've been doing a few little experiments at home. It's easy to do an experiment at home because I don't rake the leaves. I don't rake the leaves because I'm here, but no, I'm also lazy. Here are delicate little violets. So this is leaf litter from a shingle oak that I have. Here are the little violets in the spring popping up through there. That's what it looked like the first time I noticed them. That's what it looked like maybe a week later. That's what it looked like a little bit later, and that's what it looks like in the end. I didn't rake a single leaf, and those delicate little violets got up and did their thing, no problem at all. Now, if you pile the leaves up 5 feet thick, yes, you won't get a lot through it. But normal layers of leaf litter not only are fine for your plants, they're essential for your plants. We have to appreciate how harmful light pollution is. Yes, light pollution kills insects. It's one of the major causes of insect decline. And these are all of the ways that our nocturnal lighting systems are killing our nocturnal insects, particularly the moths that make the caterpillars that run our food web. This is actually good news to me. Out of all of the very serious environmental problems we have, this is the easiest one to solve. And we do have a lot of light, so we all have to get busy. All we have to do is turn them out. Flicking a switch. Flicking a switch will solve the problem. Now I know what you're going to say. Well, I can't turn the light out over my barn or over my garage or the front porch because the bad man won't come. All right, put a motion sensor on it so that it only turns on when the bad man does come. And the first thing you realize is the Batman doesn't come very often. And if you don't want to do that, even easier, go to the hardware store and get yellow light bulbs. They're called bug lights. It sounds like they're going to kill the lights, but they actually save them. Nocturnal insects are not attracted to yellow wavelengths. If we were to switch out our white bulbs for yellow bulbs overnight, we could save millions of insects. And if we use yellow LEDs, we could save millions of dollars too. Mosquito fogging. So if we do turn out our lights, if we do save a lot of insects, if we do use keystone plants, and then we hire Mosquito Joe, he's going to come kill them all. This is a booming business around the country, unfortunately. Then they say it's okay because what we're fogging is a natural organic product. And it is. It's made by chrysanthemums. It's a natural organic product, just like cyanide is a natural organic product. Ricin is a natural organic product. Nicotine is a natural organic product. Being natural and organic doesn't necessarily make it warm and fuzzy. Now they also say it only kills mosquitoes. Not so. It kills all the insects it comes in contact with, including our beleaguered monarchs. This is the result of a mosquito fogging event on Kent Island a few years ago. My friend happened to be there. He picked up a handful of dead monarchs, but he said there were thousands on the ground. It was during a big migration event. Monarchs right now, second smallest population ever. We can't afford to be killing them to control mosquitoes, but guess what? It doesn't control mosquitoes. We're doing this for nothing. It's very difficult to control mosquitoes in the adult stage. You have to kill 90% of them. These guys kill between 10 and 50%, so they're not even close to getting good control. So they have to keep coming back and back and back, charging you more money, killing your pollinators and your monarchs while they're doing it. If you really want to control mosquitoes, you do it in the larval stage. Get a bucket, fill it full of water, put in a handful of straw or hay or maybe some dead leaves, some organic matter, put it out in the sun for a few days, and you'll build up populations of diatoms and algae. And that is what mosquito larvae eat. So this becomes an irresistible brew to any female mosquito in your yard. She will preferentially lay her eggs in your bucket. Then you go to the hardware store and you buy a sheet of mosquito dunks. $12 for a season's worth of control. This is Bacillus thuringiensis. It is a natural bacterium that only kills aquatic diptera. And the only aquatic diptera in your bucket is a mosquito larva. So you put your dunk in. It's targeted. It's cheap. And it's effective, particularly if everybody does it. We have to start to appreciate the value of small properties. 82% of us live in cities, so it's not just going to be the big property owners. Small property owners get to play the game too. This is Pam Carlson's yard in Chicago. Her property abuts O'Hare Airport. She's got 1/10 of an acre, 3 times smaller than the average lot size. She's recorded 127 bird species that have used her property because it's entirely native plants, except that little bit of lawn right there. And if you have no property at all, we have a lot of value in container gardening. Now we're really pushing this at Homegrown National Park. We have a new website. I'll show it to you in a second. But if you use the appropriate plants appropriate to your ecoregion, you can turn an apartment complex like this, a pile of bricks, into a valuable resource for any of those migrating monarchs or the local bee populations. If everybody did this throughout our cities, they would become a lot more vibrant than they are. So what native plants should you put in your containers? Again, go to our website, homegrownnationalpark.org, and here is the website that will show you the best container plants in your ecoregion. And I think I'm going to show you this at the end of the talk, so you don't have to copy it down. Now, fortunately, we do have a silver bullet in our fight against both climate change and the biodiversity crisis. Fortunately, we do one thing and it helps both of them at the same time, and that is that conservation works. This is the Nachusa grasslands in Illinois. It is 3,800 acres. More than 730 plant species are there. 180 bird species use this site. It used to be a cornfield not that long ago. Nature really is resilient. I just learned about this. This is Mentor Marsh in Ohio. It was the largest Phragmites stand in Ohio. 800 acres of Phragmites. They got rid of the Phragmites. Yes, they really did. And most of what has come back has come up from the seed bank that was in there, including, I think there's 2 species of state endangered plants that are now thriving in this marsh because they got rid of Phragmites. So conservation does work. It even works on residential landscapes. Here's where Cindy and I live. That's what it looked like when we moved in the year 2000. We have 10 acres of an old farm that was broken up, and about 300 years old. The last thing they did was mow it for hay, so there were very few plants there. And then, of course, they stopped mowing it before we moved in. We built our house. And when you mow for hay in southeast Pennsylvania, you're really mowing the rootstocks of all the invasive plants that are there. So as soon as you stop mowing, what comes back? All those invasive plants. A lot of Japanese honeysuckle and bush, and autumn olive and multiflora rose and blah, 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 blah. So we had 10 acres of that, which means step one for restoration is to actually control that stuff, get rid of it. And it is much easier than you think. You just get your wife to do it. And when she's finished, this is what it looks like. So she's probably out there pulling weeds right now, I don't know. But we put some plants back, not all of them, still working on it. But my research has shown over the last many years that if you understand the number of moth species that are making a living on your piece of the earth, your little property, you have a very good index of the stability of your local food web and the productivity of that food web. How many other species is it producing? So that's what I've been doing. I've been taking a picture of the number of moths at my property for at least the last 7 years. Maybe it's been 8 years now. I am still at it, and I am up to 1,294 species of moths so far. 3 more last night. I'm not close to finished. I don't know where it's going to level off. But these guys are here because we put the plants back. And many of them are pretty and really cool. This is the chinkapin leaf miner, the skullcap skeletonizer, the neighbor, they're very friendly. The little devil, maybe not so friendly. The horrid Sally, they've got great names. The forgotten frigid owlet. I feel very sorry for the forgotten frigid owlet. The lanceolate moth, the obtuse yellow, the explicit arches, and yes, there's an implicit arches as well. The snowy-shouldered eclaris, the grateful midget, the morbid owlet, the pink-shaded fern moth, the feeble grass moth, the scribbler, the lemon plagotis, the three-patched bigwig, the cynical quaker, the showy emerald, the green marvel, Harris's three-spot, the slowpoke, the old wife underwind, the eyed pectes, the hog sphinx, the tufted bird-dropping moth. Who wouldn't want the tufted bird-dropping? Come on. This is my favorite, the spun glass caterpillar. And literally hundreds of other species have come to the plants on our property over the years. It's a lot of fun to watch these things come back. But the first thing people say is, they're going to eat all your plants, you'll be denuded. And I guess if nothing was eating the caterpillars, the bread and butter of our local food web, then maybe that would happen. But everything eats caterpillars. How about those birds? They're eating hundreds of caterpillars. Each bird is eating hundreds of caterpillars a day. And we have recorded 62 species of birds that have bred on our 10 acres, not flew by. They're breeding there because we've got the bird food, the caterpillars. We also have a lot of predators that are there, insect predators, things like ambush bugs, assassin bugs. This is the predatory stink bug. He sat next to this aggregation of milkweed tussock moth. That's what they look like when they're young. And he ate one every couple hours every time he got hungry. It was a smaller group by the time he was finished. A lot of hymenopteran parasitoids, and almost all of them are laying eggs and are caterpillars. If you try to collect a caterpillar and rear it through to an adult in August, 99% of the time it's going to be parasitized. You won't get anything. So tremendous amount of control from these parasitoids. Then we have wasps that are controlling the caterpillars. What they do is they sting the caterpillar, which paralyzes it. Then they carry it off to their nest and they lay an egg on it. This is nature's form of refrigeration. If they killed the caterpillar and took it to the nest and laid an egg on it, it would rot before the egg even hatched. But if it's paralyzed, it's alive and it stays nice and fresh so the parasitoid can eat it alive. We've got other creatures that love caterpillars and other insects that are here. We've got a few skunks, we've got possums, we've got raccoons, we've got foxes. 25% of a red fox's diet is insects. And we also have amphibians. We've got tree frog, or what are those, spring peepers. We've got toads, This is a big addition this year. Wood frogs came back for the first time after 22 years after I dug the little pond. These guys finally showed up. We're very happy about that. We've got salamanders, we've got ring-necked snakes, we've got the cutest little gray tree frogs, which are actually green when they're young. Lots of things that are controlling the caterpillars at our yard. But our lawn goals are too modest. We're starting with the lawn because it is the low-hanging fruit. It's what most of us can address very easily. But most of the privately owned land out there is in small woodlots, it's in cropland and rangeland. And that's actually a different talk. I will talk about small woodlots because we got a lot of acres. We have 406 million acres of woodlots managed by private citizens, folks just like you, not logging companies. And by managed, I mean they're logging them. They're getting wood out of these woodlots. And how you do that, and also whether or not you control the invasive species load that is in your woodlots, is going to determine their biodiversity value. Now, we do have organizations like Foundation for Sustainable Forests in Western Pennsylvania that can tell you how you can manage your woodlot in a sustainable way, truly sustainable way. There are two ways you can harvest wood. High-grade harvesting, where you take the very best trees and you leave the rest, and you get a very good harvest once. Or worst first selection, where you leave the very best trees. You take smaller, the leaners, the trees that aren't so great more frequently, so you have more frequent harvests. You end up with higher yields over time, but it goes on indefinitely. There's an indigenous tribe, I think it's northern Minnesota, that has been sustainably harvesting their woodlot. I think it's pretty sizable. For, I think, 125 years now. They now have more wood in that forest than they did when they started. So it really does work, but we have to manage the invasive species loads that are in these woodlots, because particularly in Virginia, every single woodlot is invaded. If you don't have an invaded one, I'd love to see it. This is a natural area near me. This is White Clay Creek State Park. Every bit of green you see there is an invasive plant from Asia, because the plants from Asia leaf out before plants from North America. All that green you see in the early spring, those are not plants you want. Why? Well, this is the missing link that we haven't talked enough about. Those wonderfully competitive. They act like super plants. All these plants from Asia, they can outcompete anything. They're not super plants. It's just that our deer don't like them. So the deer eat all the natives. They won't touch the autumn olive and the multiflora rose and all the other things. So of course, that's all we have. We've got the burning bush and the barberry because the deer don't like them. So there's no way you can remove all those invasives, but if you don't control your deer, what's going to come back? The deer will eat any native that tries to come back, and you'll end up with a bunch of invasives again. So getting deer under control is an essential part of attacking this invasive species problem. This is what happens when you don't control your deer, and this is actually part of our property at home. This is Japanese stilt grass. There are no understory trees here. The deer have eaten them all. Of course, the deer don't like Japanese stilt grass. So this is not a functional forest. It's not going to replace itself over the years, and until we get our deer under control, we're not going to have any rejuvenation of our forests. This is the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I was there last year about this time, and the first thing I noticed is they've got wonderful understory. That's what a healthy forest looks like, folks, if you haven't seen one lately. And I asked my ranger friend, I said, how are you controlling your deer? And he says, we don't control our deer. I said, well, how do you have a wonderful understory like this? He said, well, we've got black bear, we've got coyotes, and we've got bobcats, and we don't shoot them. And they control the deer. And so predators work. Of course, there's another serious downside to deer overabundance, and I'm also not going to focus on this, but it is Lyme disease. It's a serious issue. So we've got to control our deer. You can put the predators back. In some places that will work. You can hire sharpshooters. That works temporarily, very expensive. A lot of pushback against that. Bern Blassie at Cornell is suggesting we move back to market hunting. Look at how well market hunting took care of those pesky bison. Got rid of them. Carolina parakeet, the passenger pigeon, no problem, it works. So, going to have to change some rules for that to happen now. What do you do in the meantime? I have to put a cage around anything I want, or it is gone. Okay, there's something that's common to all these conservation approaches, and that is whether or not they succeed depends on the decisions that you and I make. I had a student in one of my classes a few years ago, Amanda Crandall, and this was part of an answer to a final exam. She said, well, conservationists claim to be managing species and habitats. What we're actually managing is people. And that is so true. These are sociological issues. We need to change our adversarial relationship with nature to a collaborative one. It is the only path forward. And the question is, can we do that? And I think, yes, of course we can do that. We have to do it, but I also think we can do it. It's not going to be that hard. You don't have to save biodiversity for a living, but you can save it where you live, and if you do it, it empowers you. More and more people are recognizing that we've got some serious issues on the planet, but they feel powerless. What can one person do? Well, one person can shrink the lawn, one person can modify their lights, one person can put a pollinator garden in, remove invasive plants, add keystone plants, fire mosquito Joe. One person can totally revitalize the little part of the ecosystem on their yard and then enhance their greater local ecosystem instead of continuing to degrade it. And it shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You get depressed. Just worry about the piece of the earth that you can influence. If you own property, it's obvious. That's where you start. If you don't own property, help somebody who does. Help a land conservancy, help a park or preserve. They're all underfunded, they're all understaffed. They will love you as a volunteer. So we created Homegrown National Park as a mechanism for helping people do these things, providing the motivation, the guidance, the community for millions of people who right now don't know that they have a role in the future of conservation. But they do. We want to educate them so that they can tackle these very serious conservation challenges. Because whether or not we act now is going to determine nature's fate and then ultimately our own. Thanks very much.
Well, how about that? There's an expression that I see when I read about Homegrown National Park that I really love, and it's called, think of Homegrown National Park as an antidote to despair, and that really works for me. And also, I love that you say, think of your yard, not as a yard, but as habitat. It never really occurred to me before that we were responsible for helping to keep that habitat alive. Thank you, Doug. We have a few minutes for questions, so I think we've got somebody up there. Thank you, Mike.
There's a question.
There's one way back in the corner.
Thanks.
Hi.
I don't think it's on.
On?
There you go.
On now? Okay. Hi. My name's Nick. I've done native plant stuff for a long time. I've taught environmental science to high schoolers, studied it in college, and have really enjoyed working with my family to convert our yard from invasive species over to native species. And it has been a process. I'll say it's not been an overnight thing. We had tons of invasive species in our yard. Some that were spreading to the park next to us. And we are still learning to this day what works in our yard and what doesn't. I will put in a plug for how to do this in a sustainable way and how to build community through doing this. So one of the things that I think makes this a sustainable practice, because it is something that has a lot of trial and error, and there are actually a lot of people who have experience doing this, and it can also be expensive to do. I guess what I'm getting at is there's some really cool organizations to help with that, and I want to plug one in particular that's local, and I don't know if anyone here is from there, the Clifton Institute. Is anyone here from Clifton? Okay, so I'm going to do a big plug for the Clifton Institute, which is down the road. They're a nonprofit that, like you were mentioning, one of the nonprofits can help you with this. Has somewhere around 900 acres of land. It's in Warrenton, just north of Warrenton. And they have a program that is totally free to landowners within an hour or so of Warrenton. And they'll actually come out and have an expert visit your property and give you suggestions on what might work. They also do a really good job of building community. So they have all sorts of educational events. They have times when you can go to Clifton and learn how to control invasive species and do a really good job with that. So I think one of the best ways for me that I found with my family to make this a sustainable thing is to try to build community. There are also plant swap groups on Facebook. So you can go and meet people and share plants that they have in excess. And then also go out and appreciate the hell out of it. So it's not so much a question, big fan, just providing resources for people who are really excited. And I've read a lot of your books and stuff like that, so I'm a big fan. So anyway, yeah, sorry if that wasn't a question, but just want to bring some enthusiasm to the room here.
Thank you. Well, thanks for that.
Yeah. This is a question. You made light of the whole, I want to follow up on that actually, by saying that you made light of the whole invasive species removal project by suggesting we get our wives to do it. Doesn't always work. So I do wonder.
You need a new wife.
I do wonder how you managed invasive species removal on your own place, whether it was mechanical, chemical, how much, what was the hydrocarbon investment? Did you use herbicides? And how would you scale up whatever you did to deal with invasive species on a larger scale?
Okay, valid question. We tried everything. In the beginning, no herbicides. The day we signed when we signed to own the property, whatever you sign, I rushed out. We had giant Oriental bittersweet vines. I cut them off at the base, and I, saved those trees. I didn't paint the stump at all. So 23 years later, I am still pulling out the shoots from those root systems that I didn't kill. You really have to kill the root system. That was a valuable lesson for me because I realized I'm not going to live forever. But these things will live forever if you don't kill the roots. So my wife won't use herbicides. She just whacks them out. A mattock is a really, really important tool. You can mattocks a different size. You can have hand mattocks. Looks like a pickaxe, but it's got one broad end. Or you can get a full-size mattock, and you can whack out Oriental. You can whack out bush honeysuckle. You can whack out Elaeagnus, autumn olive, pretty easily. Pretty big trees with a mattock. I tied chains around the base of huge multiflora rose bushes and pulled them out with tractor. You always leave a few roots in there when you do that, but you can make big piles of bodies and it makes you feel like you've really done something. What we do these days, though, is saw off the trunk at the base and paint it. I use herbicide sparingly. When you paint it, you're using very little material. You are killing the root systems, and you only have to do it once. So that's what we do. Now, there's some things that really have beaten me, like Japanese stiltgrass. It's an annual. You're not going to paint each one of those. We've got it over all 10 acres at this point. It's one of these things that have come in. When we moved in, there was no Japanese stiltgrass. So, what we're going to do with that, I don't know. We need a disease to take care of it. So it's a constant battle. But we've used just about all the techniques.
Yes, I would just like to say, well, I do have a question, but I would just like to say it's such an honor and privilege to have you here tonight. I'm a novice in the world of conservation and invasives and a small property owner, and I'm totally inspired now to make changes. And my question is, you spoke briefly about the map, or maybe you talked a lot about the map, but I'm not sure I have my arms wrapped around it. What do you mean about the map?
Okay. I actually have Brandon Huff, who's the executive director of Homegrown National Park, sitting right here, and he's going to stand up and answer that.
Yeah, Doug is short, isn't he? Sorry, Doug. when Homegrown National Park was founded, we needed a way to track the efficacy of the movement for multiple reasons. Donors and grantors want to know it's working. We want to know it's working. We want to create a fear of missing out. We want to know over time, as land is added to the map, where is this movement not working, where it needs attention. And that's what the map does. At its simplest, you just make an account and you commit to an amount of restoration. And then as you put in plantings, you head towards that goal. So for me, on our property, we have about 2 acres. I'm from Southwest Ohio, by the way. Thank you for having me. Claire brought me back. I got to come last year. It's a beautiful area. And so I originally committed to about a half acre.
Why don't you move further down that way?
I originally committed to a half an acre on our property, restoring it after I read Doug's book 3 years ago. I'm a novice too. 3 years is not much time in this movement and learning, as the first gentleman mentioned. And then I ripped out our burning bushes and I did a little planting, and I think that was about 400 square feet. And so I went back into the map and I added my 400 square feet. And then I ripped out the honeysuckle under our catalpas and did my first, what I call a little pocket prairie, about 1,000 square feet. And then my wife let me kill 13,000 square feet. And so I put in another prairie, and then I planted a forest. Well, it'll be a forest someday, or a nice little woodlot, but about 100 in trees and shrubs. And so these projects keep coming. And actually just the other day, this is what I do nowadays. I walk out in the yard with my wife and I go, this right here, do we need this? Have you ever thrown the Frisbee here with the dog? And she's like, no. I'm like, are you ever gonna throw the Frisbee with the dog? She's like, no. And I was like, congrats, the bitternut hickory's going in there and the grass is going away. So I just kind of 500 square feet at a time now. And eventually I surpassed the half acre. We got to about an acre now and still gnawing away. But when everybody does that, we can see the total. And in just about 3.5 years now, we've had 39,000 people get on the map, about 100,000 acres. If we were a national park, I think we'd be about 40th largest national park now. So that's really what it's about. And we have a new feature too, where organizations can get on. As Doug said, we work in tandem with other nonprofits. It's not zero sum. We view it as a positive sum situation. So we work with like Wild Ones, and we're working on getting the Wild Ones national chapter on the map, and all their organizations, they have like 100+ chapters. They'll be represented on the map. So when you click them, you can see all of their properties that have been restored. We have landscapers that are on the map who have done 200+ properties in, Metro DC, and 200 properties there. It comes out to about 11 acres. But they all tie back. Their social media channels, their pictures are displayed on the map. So that's really what the map is. It's a tool to track the efficacy of the movement, hopefully to inspire a fear of missing out to when you realize that everyone's on the map but you. You should probably get on the map. So, thank y'all for having me.
We have another question here.
So I have 2 questions. Given that on my property I have more than enough bittersweet and autumn olive and multiflora rose, can I be forgiven if I can't tackle the honeysuckle? Because I don't know how to do it. But that's
Hire
not the real
somebody.
question. Yeah. But the real question is, how much does, as I change the composition of the plant material, how much does mix matter, the variety of plants? So, for example, if I do nothing, I'll get a lot of locust and cherry. I won't get oak. I have a ton of tulip poplars, which I know are not particularly productive for caterpillars. But I have a lot of them, and I would be eliminating a lot of carbon sequestration and shade and so forth if I tried to remove them and try to replace them with something. So how would you advise me on mix?
Well, first of all, you are managing your property, so you are going to do something. You're not going to just do nothing. Native plants will come back, and in a semi-healthy ecosystem, the oaks come back too. The blue jays will fly a mile and a half and plant oaks, acorns in your yard. So it'll happen naturally over time if you control the deer so they don't eat every oak seedling that comes up, because they will. But you get to decide, what am I managing for? The more diversity you have, diversity is a good thing, but let's say you're trying to help the monarch, and you put in one milkweed rabbit. A female monarch will come and she'll see that and she'll lay an egg on it and she'll fly around looking for other milkweeds. So there's one, she'll lay another egg on it, then she flies around, 3 eggs. That's more than that one rabbit can sustain. So those caterpillars will hatch, they'll eat it down to nothing, the woman gets upset, and the caterpillars starve to death. One rabbit is not enough. So if you're targeting a particular species, you have to have enough to sustain a population of them. And monarchs are great examples. We want milkweed patches that can sustain both the monarchs, as many as you want, the milkweed tussock moth, the milkweed beetles. That whole community can be there in a patch that's maybe 10 by 15 feet. That's plenty of milkweeds to sustain a good population. But that means you're going to sacrifice some other things. So it depends on how big your property is and what you're managing for. If you have a giant property, the more diversity, the better. Shout it out.
Just one more question?
She's had her hand up the whole time.
So public policy seems like a place you could go to try to change the trajectory of what cities plant, but also for an architecture or landscape design programs at colleges to say, don't recommend a fast-growing tree that's not going to be sustainable. Where's that? Is there a group that does that kind of public policy?
Well, there are groups around that are doing that, and it's making some difference. There are states that encourage this. Minnesota has a cost-sharing program that is paying homeowners to reduce the size of their lawn and put in Minnesota prairie plants. Pennsylvania has a similar program. Virginia is starting a similar program, believe it or not. California is giving you $3 per square foot rebate for every square foot of lawn you replace with a xeric planting. So some of these programs are coming my brain is fried. They're starting, they're beginning, but we need more of them. And it's public pressure that brings them about. Do I know a specific group that's creating this around the country? No, but we've got Bee Cities USA and Tree Cities USA. These are local groups that are saying we want to focus on this particular group. I can tell you that conservation is a much higher priority across the country now than it was just a few years ago. So there's all kinds of interested organizations trying to do their part.
Thanks. Okay, thanks, Doug. He's had a long day and he got into some really bad traffic getting here. Thank you, Doug. Thank you all.